The air left my lungs so fast it hurt when my father slammed the manila envelope down across the polished walnut dining table and said, in a voice loud enough to carry into the marble foyer, "You have until tonight to get out of this house." The brass chandelier above us threw hard yellow light over everything, the glossy family photographs on the sideboard, the half-finished roast chicken cooling on a white platter, the crystal water glasses my mother only used when she wanted an audience. My mother stood at the head of the table in a cream silk blouse with her hands flattened against the wood, her wedding ring flashing every time she jabbed a finger in my direction. My younger brother Connor leaned against the archway with his arms folded and one ankle crossed over the other, wearing that little crooked smirk he used whenever he thought someone else was finally taking the hit for him. Across from him, my Aunt Vivian sat unnaturally still, one hand wrapped around the stem of her wineglass, her eyes lowered as if she'd been invited to a recital instead of an execution. And beside the china cabinet, shifting a leather portfolio from one hand to the other, stood Denise Kessler, the real estate agent my mother had apparently brought in to witness my humiliation. "Say something," my mother snapped. "Or are parasites incapable of speech now? My name is Camille Mercer. I'm 28, and this is a story of how my parents called me a parasite in a house they didn't know I legally owned, and how I let them walk themselves all the way to the edge before they finally realized whose name was on the deed." My fingers had gone cold, but my face stayed calm. That calm was not natural. It was built. It had been built over months of watching my parents lie with polished smiles and practiced outrage, over years of learning that if I reacted too quickly, too emotionally, too honestly, they would twist my reaction into proof that I was unstable, ungrateful, dramatic, difficult. So I didn't react. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my father. I looked at the signature line on the top page, sticking out of the flap. He had even printed it on nice paper. "You invited a realtor," I said evenly. My mother gave a short, humorless laugh. "Because unlike you, some of us understand that homes are assets. This family has carried you long enough." The word family landed in the room like bad perfume. Heavy, familiar, suffocating. Denise shifted her weight. I noticed the way she kept her portfolio hugged close to her ribs instead of holding it loosely at her side. People do that when they want a barrier between themselves and the situation they're standing in. Connor rolled his shoulders and pushed off the archway, sensing blood in the water. "Mom's been too nice," he said. "You're 28, Cam. 28. You work on a laptop in pajamas, you eat food you don't pay for, and you act like you're doing everyone a favor by existing." I turned my head and looked at him. "That's a creative summary." His smirk tightened. My father pulled out a chair, not to sit in it, just to drag it backward with a scrape that made everybody flinch. He liked sound. He liked using noise the way other men used fists. "This isn't a debate," he said. "You've been living here rent-free for over a year. You've inserted yourself into this household, interfered in private family matters, opened mail that doesn't belong to you, and God knows what else. Teresa has had enough. I've had enough. Pack your things and go." The fluorescent under-cabinet lights in the kitchen hummed behind him. Somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock ticked with obscene politeness. My mother picked up her water glass, took a small sip, then set it back down with careful precision. That was her tell. Whenever she thought she'd won, she got delicate. "I didn't open your mail," I said. Connor barked out a laugh. "Really? Then how did you know Dad met with a lender?" There it was. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just slipped into the room like a knife. I let one beat pass. Then another. My mother's chin lifted a fraction. Exactly. The trap had been set better than most of theirs. I'd give them that. They dragged in witnesses. They created a narrative. They baited me with an accusation nested inside a larger accusation, hoping I'd defend the smaller one and miss the real point. If I said I knew about the lender because I'd seen the pre-approval packet on the printer, they'd accuse me of snooping. If I denied it too strongly, they'd frame my denial as proof of deceit. And if I lost my temper, which was what they really wanted, Denise would later tell whoever asked that I seemed volatile and unstable when the family tried to have a reasonable conversation. My mother pressed on. "You thought we didn't notice, didn't you? The way you hover. The way you involve yourself in finances that are none of your business. The way you act like this place belongs to you." That last line almost made me smile. Instead, I looked at the envelope again. A notice to vacate. 30 days. Signed by Teresa Hale. No attorney letterhead. No court filing. Just theater in thick black ink. My Aunt Vivian finally looked up. Her lipstick had faded at the center, leaving a pale line around the rim of her glass. "Maybe everyone should breathe," she murmured. "No," my mother said sharply, not even glancing at her sister. "We have breathed. For years. We have helped and tolerated and accommodated. And what has Camille done? Drifted. Lurked. Judged. Lurked," I repeated quietly. "Yes," she snapped. "Like some kind of house cat that refuses to leave the porch." Connor laughed again, too quickly this time. My father didn't. He was watching me. He knew me better than the others did. He knew the absence of a reaction from me wasn't surrender. It was arithmetic. He put both hands on the chair back and leaned in. "There's one more thing. Since you've made such a hobby out of monitoring this family, we thought it would be best if Denise walked through the house tomorrow for listing photos. That means your room needs to be cleared tonight. Personal items boxed. No delays. No tears. No scene." There it was. The real agenda. Not just removing me. Selling the house. The table went still. Even Connor blinked. My mother gave him a quick look, annoyed that he'd shown surprise. So he hadn't known that part. Interesting. "Listing photos," I said. Denise lowered her eyes. "Yes," my mother said. "This house is going on the market. Frankly, it should have happened months ago. We could have downsized, traveled, enjoyed our lives. Instead, we've been stuck subsidizing an adult child who turned grief into a lease agreement. Grief. Now we were at the grave. The house had belonged to my grandmother, Evelyn Mercer. White brick, slate roof, leaded glass front windows that scattered colored light over the foyer in the mornings. She bought it in 1987 after her divorce, long before my mother decided she had always been destined for a better zip code. When Grandma got sick, I moved back from Chicago and spent 14 months managing medications, appointments, night terrors, insurance disputes, and the slow administrative violence of watching a sharp woman become dependent on people who did not deserve her trust. My mother came for photo-worthy moments. My father came to discuss options. Connor came when he needed money. I came when Grandma called my name at 2 a.m. because she was afraid the walls were breathing. And when she died, the whole house changed temperature. Not at first. At first there were flowers, casseroles, cream-colored condolence cards, my mother crying in controlled, expensive-looking bursts, my father handling handshakes in the driveway like a politician, Connor disappearing every time boxes needed to be moved. Then came the inventorying, the quiet conversations, the locked study drawers that suddenly interested everyone, the phrases people use when death becomes paperwork, what she would have wanted, what's practical. We need to be fair. Fairness is a beautiful word in the mouths of greedy people. It shines like silverware. My mother mistook my silence for weakness. She always did. "You can stop with the martyr act," she said. "Helping your grandmother did not entitle you to become dead weight in our lives." I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her shoulders were squared too hard. Her voice was half a note too high. She was angry. Yes, but underneath the anger was something else. Anxiety. Not fear exactly. The more brittle cousin of fear. Urgency. They needed me out fast. My father slid the envelope toward me. "Read it." I didn't touch it. Connor uncrossed his arms. "Come on, Cam. Don't do the frozen statue thing. You've been caught. Just take your stuff and go." "Caught doing what?" "Being here," he said. "For free." Denise cleared her throat softly. My mother spun to her with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see this." Denise gave a tiny nod. Family transitions can be difficult. That was such a careful sentence, I felt the first real flicker of respect for her. My father tapped the paper with one blunt finger. 30 days is generous. I finally reached forward, not for the notice, for my water glass. I took a slow sip, set it down, and folded my hands in front of me. Deliberate slowness always infuriated people who wanted drama from me. It was like moving through honey while they were on fire. Then I said, very calmly, "You might want to postpone the photographer." Connor frowned. My mother laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Excuse me," I said. I replied evenly, "You might want to postpone the photographer." My father straightened. "And why, exactly, would we do that?" Because if Denise takes listing photos of his house tomorrow, she'll be photographing property you do not have the legal right to sell. The silence that followed was absolute. Not metaphorical. Not dramatic. Absolute. Even the hum from the kitchen seemed to fall back for a second. Connor looked from me to our mother, waiting for someone to correct the joke. My mother's face emptied, then reset so quickly it was almost impressive. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "I'm not." My father gave a slow, contemptuous smile. "Camille, stop." But his hands had left the chair back. That mattered. I reached into the canvas tote hanging from the back of my seat and took out my iPad. Not rushed. Not triumphant. Just precise. I entered the passcode, opened a folder, and turned the screen toward Denise first. "I imagine," I said, "that before you list a property, you run title." Denise stared at the screen. A flush crept up from her collar. My mother's voice sharpened. "Denise." Denise didn't look at her. "Mrs. Hale." I rotated the screen toward my parents. On it was a county record search with parcel number, transfer date, and deed information. 18 Rowan Crescent. Owner of record, Camille Elaine Mercer. Connor pushed away from the archway, so fast his heel clipped the baseboard. "What?" My mother went white in patches, not all at once. Around the mouth first. Then the temples, like color leaving paper dropped in water. "That's fake," she said. "It's county public record." My father took one step around the table. "Give me that." "No," I said. His jaw jumped. "Give me the damn device." "Sit down." He actually stopped. Only for a second. But he stopped. I zoomed in on the filing date. The recording stamp. The attorney name. Jordan Vale, Vale Mercer and Dunn, Estate Counsel. My grandmother's lawyer. My mother made a sound deep in her throat. Not a word. More like the first crack in a wall. "You told us the estate wasn't settled," she said. "I told you probate paperwork was ongoing," I said. Which was true. This house wasn't part of probate. Connor looked openly lost now. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, still calm, Grandma transferred the house through the trust. It never passed through Mom. My mother slapped one hand against the table. "That is impossible." "Is it?" "She would never do that to me." The sentence hung there longer than it should have. Not she would never do that. She would never do that to me. I watched Denise lower herself into a chair as if her knees had gone unreliable. My Aunt Vivian lifted her eyes and met mine for the first time that evening. There was something in her face I couldn't name yet. Not surprise. Not guilt. Recognition, maybe. As if a piece had finally clicked into place exactly where she'd suspected it might. My father recovered first, because men like him always do. Pride is a crude kind of oxygen. "So you pulled a title record," he said. "Congratulations. That doesn't make you owner. People manipulate records all the time. There will be an explanation." "There is," I said. "I have it." I tapped to the next file. A scan certification of trust. Then the deed. Then the property tax statements for the past 14 months. Each one paid from my account. Then the homeowner's insurance renewals. Then the maintenance invoices, roof flashing repair, boiler service, sewer line inspection, also paid by me. My mother grabbed the back of a dining chair to steady herself. "No." "Yes." Connor stared at the screen like it had spoken. "You've been paying the taxes for over a year." He looked at our parents. "You said." "I know what I said." My mother snapped. "Ah. So there it was. He'd been lied to too. Not out of kindness. Just out of hierarchy." My father's voice lowered, which was more dangerous than shouting from him. "When were you going to tell us?" "When you stopped lying." "What lies?" "The lender," I said. "The photographer. The listing appointment on Thursday at 10. The bridge loan application. The assumption that forcing me out would make the sale cleaner." Denise inhaled through her nose and stared at the table. Connor's head turned slowly toward her. "Thursday," he said. My mother rounded on him. "Stay out of this." "No," he said, for once not sounding smug at all. "What Thursday?" I let the confusion breathe. Let it settle over the room like dust and light. Then I opened the email screenshots. "I knew about the sale meeting last Tuesday," I said, because Dad printed the Blackstone Community Bank pre-approval packet on the office printer and left one page behind. I knew about Denise's walkthrough because Mom texted the gate code and asked if the front hydrangeas should be cut back for curb appeal. I knew about the lender because they called the listed owner for consent on the home equity inquiry. My father blinked. They what? They called me. His face changed. Not much. Just enough. That was revelation number 1. I scrolled again. I also know someone submitted a forged e-signature on documents authorizing a preliminary valuation of the property, which is mortgage fraud, by the way, even if the loan never funds. My mother's mouth opened and closed once. Connor whispered, Jesus. That was revelation number 2. Then I placed the iPad flat on the table, opened the voice memo app, and pressed play. My father's voice filled the dining room, slightly tinny from the speaker but unmistakable. Once she's out, we can move fast. 30 days on paper, change the locks in 10. She won't do anything. She hates scenes. My mother's voice followed. Denise says title may still need clarification. And then my father, dry and dismissive. Then we clarify after. Buyers don't need every detail if the price is right. No one moved. Connor's face went blank. My mother looked at the speaker as if it had materialized out of the wood grain. My Aunt Vivian slowly set down her wineglass. That was revelation number 3. I stopped the recording. You recorded us, my mother whispered. You held your strategy meeting in the breakfast room under Grandma's security camera, I said. The one you forgot was still backed up to my phone after I reset the system. My father dragged a hand over his mouth. For the first time in my life, he looked old. Then he straightened again, because humiliation makes some people more dangerous before it makes them smaller. You sneaky little. Careful, I said quietly. There are witnesses. He stared at me. Actually, no. He stared at the version of me he had failed to calculate. That was different. Connor pulled a chair back and sat down hard, like his legs had decided without consulting him. Mom, he said, voice cracking around the word. Whose house is this? My mother didn't answer him. She was looking at me with the naked fury of someone whose private story had just been dragged into daylight. You planned this? Yes. For how long? Long enough. Denise finally found her voice. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Hale, I need to be very clear. If title is in Camille's name, I cannot market this property without her written consent. You work for us, my mother snapped. Denise looked up then, and whatever fear had been in her posture at the beginning of the evening had flattened into professional steel. No, I work under a license I intend to keep. That little sentence hit my mother harder than the deed had. Connor looked at the notice to vacate, then back at me. So this is meaningless. Legally, I said. Yes. My father pointed at the device. That transfer was manipulated. Evelyn was sick. She was sharp enough to amend her trust in front of 2 witnesses and her attorney. We can discuss capacity in a conference room if you'd like. I'm sure Jordan Vale would enjoy that. At the name, my mother's eyes flicked away. Interesting again. So she had spoken to Jordan at some point. She already knew enough to be worried. I'm your mother, she said. And in any other room, from almost anyone else, the sentence might have sounded wounded. From her it sounded like a rank she expected me to salute. You are, I said. And you would do this to your own family. I almost laughed at the symmetry of it. The way people commit theft, and then accuse the lock of aggression. You called me a parasite, I said. Then tried to evict me from my own house in front of a realtor. Her nostrils flared. Because you let us believe. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. Those are not the same thing. My father slammed his palm flat on the table. Connor flinched. Denise did not. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. I gathered the iPad and slid it back into my tote. Then I stood up, smoothed the front of my charcoal sweater, and looked at each of them in turn. At Connor, pale and stunned. At Denise, now carefully expressionless. At Vivian, whose eyes held mine for one strange, quiet second. At my mother, rigid with disbelief. At my father, furious because he could already feel control leaving him and had no idea how to stop it. You have exactly 48 hours, I said, to hire counsel. Then I picked up the ridiculous notice to vacate, folded it once, and tucked it into my bag. I'm keeping this, I added. It may be useful later. And I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, voices erupted at once, My mother sharp and high, my father demanding, Connor asking the same question 3 different ways as if repetition might change the answer. Denise said something about disclosure obligations. A chair scraped. Glass clinked. My Aunt Vivian did not speak at all. I went upstairs slowly, one hand gliding along the lacquered banister my grandmother used to polish every spring with lemon oil until the wood glowed. My pulse was high but steady. Not triumph. Not yet. What I felt was closer to confirmation. The moment in a storm when the first branch comes down, and you know the rest of the tree is about to follow. They thought they had ambushed me with an eviction notice and a photographer's schedule, but they had no idea they just handed me exactly what I needed to finish what my grandmother had started. The next morning the house smelled like scorched coffee and expensive panic. My mother always burned coffee when she was angry. My father had already left by 6, which meant he was either trying to get ahead of something or hiding inside work because work was the only place where people still mistook his confidence for competence. Connor's bedroom door stayed shut until nearly 10. Denise had sent a terse email at 7:14 a.m. withdrawing from any potential listing activity pending verified legal review. She copied me. She did not copy my parents. That told me more than the email itself. I took my breakfast in the sunroom, where the pale October light came through the old glass and softened rectangles and warmed the faded Persian runner beneath the wicker chairs. The radiator hissed on and off beside me. I ate toast with apricot jam and answered 3 emails from Jordan Vale's office, each one crisp, unflustered, and devastating in implication. He'd reviewed the recording. He'd reviewed the fake notice. He'd reviewed the flagged equity inquiry. He wanted a formal meeting. He also wanted to know if I had any proof my parents had attempted to leverage the property beyond the preliminary loan contact. I did. That had been the point of waiting. When my grandmother first told me, in the last clear month before her mind started slipping at the edges, that the house would be mine, I thought she was delirious. We were in the library with the green-shaded lamp on, rain tapping lightly at the leaded windows, and she had looked straight at me over the rim of her teacup and said, "You are the only person in this family who understands the difference between loving a house and wanting one." I asked her not to say things like that. It felt dangerous. She only smiled. Dangerous to whom? That was Grandma Evelyn. Even weak, she could put a whole courtroom into one sentence. After the funeral, Jordan confirmed it. The trust had been amended. The deed transfer was structured cleanly. The house was mine outright, though he strongly recommended I keep that information private until the estate dust settled because, in his exact words, real property reveals character faster than grief does. He was right. Within 3 weeks, my mother had begun referring to the house as our equity. Within 6, my father was suggesting tasteful updates that would modernize the asset. By month 3, they had quietly moved from their condo into Grandma's house under the guise of supporting each other through family transition, then simply never left. Connor followed after a breakup and an overdraft checking account. At first I allowed it because I was tired and because some sick, leftover part of me still believed that if I behaved generously enough, clearly enough, indispensably enough, they would eventually behave decently in return. Instead they became bolder. Bills disappeared from the mail tray and reappeared opened in my mother's handbag. Rooms were rest-aged, without my consent. My father started referring to the 3rd-floor office as his. Connor used the driveway gate code to host a party, while I was in Wilmington handling a records issue for work. Every boundary I set was treated as a phase. Every practical concern I raised was retranslated as emotional instability. And because I knew the legal ground under me was solid, I made a deliberate choice that looked, from the outside, like passivity. I watched. People reveal more when they think they've already won. By August, the first solid clue surfaced. A man from Blackstone Community Bank left a voicemail asking to confirm owner occupancy status before moving forward with preliminary options. He used my full legal name and the property address. I called back from my office line at Halcyon Risk Advisory, where I reviewed title defects, occupancy disputes, and fraud patterns for a national property insurer. When you spend 5 years studying how people lie on paper, you stop believing in administrative accidents. The lender was polite until I asked whose email he had on file. Then he got quieter, then apologetic, then suddenly unable to share details. That afternoon I changed nothing. I confronted no one. I simply pulled the camera backups, exported account notices, and sent one short email to Jordan with the subject line, "It's starting." That was 6 weeks before the dinner. Over those 6 weeks, I built my own file. A screenshot of my mother texting Denise Kessler, "Need to move quickly before daughter becomes difficult." A forwarded PDF of a staging checklist Connor had accidentally opened on the shared desktop. A copy of the preliminary lender inquiry showing an electronic acknowledgement that did not match any of my devices. A security clip from the breakfast room where my father, pacing in shirt sleeves, said, "Once the place lists, she'll fall in line. People like Camille always do when there's money involved." That last one almost made me angry enough to act too soon. People like Camille. As if I were some personality type he could file under compliant female relative with boundary issues. But anger is useful only when harnessed. Otherwise it is just heat. So I waited until they needed witnesses. It took less time than I expected. By 11 that morning, Jordan's office had secured a temporary advisory hold with the title company most local brokers used, flagged the property for unauthorized listing attempts, and prepared a formal notice reminding my parents that occupation did not create ownership. He was efficient in the way expensive lawyers are efficient, polished, unhurried, quietly lethal. He had also asked me, with that same polished calm, whether I wanted to pursue merely possession of the house or a broader accounting of my parents' conduct. That was the real question. Because once you open a door like that, you don't just find one theft. You find the architecture around it. I sat in the sunroom with my coffee cooling beside me and looked out at Grandma's camellias, glossy and dark against the brick garden wall. The air outside was brittle enough to silver the edges of the lawn. Inside, the old house creaked softly as the heat rose through pipes buried in plaster decades before I was born. A place like that stores memory in the walls, not sentimentality. Weight. And beneath the weight was another truth I had spent most of my adult life avoiding. The attempted sale was not the first betrayal. It was just the first betrayal I could prove. At noon, Connor appeared in the doorway, looking hungover without having had the dignity to drink. His hair was flattened on one side, and he'd put on yesterday's sweatshirt over clean jeans as if costume could stand in for composure. He hovered there with one hand wrapped around the doorframe. "Is Mom lying?" he said. "No." He swallowed. "So the house is really yours?" "Yes." He came into the room and sat opposite me without asking. That alone told me he was rattled. Connor never sat lightly. He collapsed into furniture like it had been waiting for him. "Why wouldn't you tell anyone?" "I told the people I needed to tell." "Come on." I looked at him. He looked away first. "You let us all look stupid," he muttered. "No," I said. "You did that yourselves." A flush rose along his throat. "I didn't know about the lender." "I know. You think that makes me innocent." "No." He exhaled hard through his nose. The sunlight cut across one side of his face, turning his skin almost translucent at the cheekbone. For the first time in years, he looked less like my enemy than what he actually was. A man who had spent his life aligning himself with power because he was terrified of being outside it. "Mom said Grandma wanted the house to stay in the family," he said. "It is in the family. You know what I mean." "I do. That's the problem." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "What happens now? Jordan wants everyone in a room." "Lawyers?" "Yes." Connor let out a small, disgusted laugh. "Dad's going to lose his mind." "Probably." He nodded once, slow. Then he said, "Did Grandma really mean to cut Mom out?" There are questions that sound factual but are really biographical. What he was asking was not about the trust. He was asking whether the family story he had built his life around had always been false. "Grandma loved Mom," I said. "She just didn't trust her." Connor sat with that. Outside, a leaf skated across the flagstone path. Somewhere upstairs, a drawer slammed. My mother. Even in distress, she did not walk heavily. She rearranged things with anger instead. Cabinet doors, linens, silverware, the domestic language of control. Connor stood. "If Dad asks, I talk to you. You can tell him whatever you want." His laugh this time was softer, almost empty. "No, I really can't." He left the room, and I watched him go with the strange, cool sadness reserved for siblings who were trained into becoming accomplices before they understood what loyalty was. At 2:30, my Aunt Vivian texted me. "Meet me at the side gate in 10. Come alone. There was no punctuation. Vivian was either immaculate or absent. She had no middle setting. She lived in a restored loft downtown above a ceramic studio, wore black almost year-round, and had spent most of my childhood being described by my mother as unreliable, which I later learned was Mercer family code for insufficiently obedient. She had arrived early to the dinner the night before, kissed my cheek, complimented the peonies my mother hadn't grown, and then gone nearly silent through the whole performance. I hadn't been sure whether that silence meant cowardice, calculation, or something else. I found her at the wrought iron side gate where the ivy climbed the brick in dark ropes. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the cloud cover and held a slim white envelope between two fingers. "You were very good last night," she said. "You looked very neutral." That was the idea. She handed me the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages. My mother to Vivian. My father to Vivian. A thread from 3 weeks earlier where my mother wrote, "We need to get her out before she starts acting like Evelyn left her something." Another from my father 2 days later, "Denise is ready. We'll make it a family intervention, so there are witnesses. If Camille gets emotional, all the better." I looked up. Vivian leaned one shoulder against the brick. "I've been taking screenshots for a month." "Why?" Her mouth bent, not quite into a smile. "Because your mother gets stupid when she's confident." That was the first moment I trusted her. "You could have told me sooner." I wanted to know how far they'd go. She tipped her head. "Now we know." The wind lifted a few strands of her dark hair and pressed them against the frame of her glasses. She removed them and looked, for once, directly like my grandmother around the eyes. "There's more," she said. "Martin's been moving money." "From where?" "Not from the house. From what was supposed to be your grandmother's care reserve. Teresa signed off on transfers after Evelyn went downhill. I thought it was medical. It wasn't. I felt the first true surge of anger then. Clean. Bright. Controlled. How much? Last I saw, 48,000. Maybe more." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. I copied what I could from Teresa's laptop when she asked me to fix her printer. I took it. Vivian watched my face carefully. "I'm not doing this because I enjoy being right, Camille." "Why are you doing it?" "Good." "Then do exactly what I say. Do not threaten them. Do not negotiate in hallways. Do not accept emotional apologies in place of documents. Let them stew. We'll set a formal conference for Friday." I stood in the library while he spoke, one hand resting on the back of my grandmother's leather reading chair. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. The green lamp pooled light over the desk where she used to write letters in slanted blue ink to people who did not deserve that much grace. "Jordan," I said, "I want a full accounting." There was a short pause. Not hesitation. Approval. "I thought you might." By Friday morning, the house had split into territories. My mother stayed in the front rooms as if public elegance could still save her. My father stalked between the kitchen and study, making aggressive phone calls in a voice pitched just below a shout. Connor vanished for hours at a time and reappeared with the exhausted face of someone discovering that his role in the family was not, in fact, immunity. Vivian came and went without explanation. No one ate together. No one even performed the fiction of normal. At 9:45 I left for Vale Mercer and Dunn in a black wool coat, low heels, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had worn to every unpleasant meeting of her life. The law office occupied the 7th floor of an old banking building downtown where the elevators still had brass doors and the lobby smelled faintly of marble dust and furniture polish. In the conference room, the wood table was so glossy it reflected the recessed lighting in clean white ovals. Leather chairs lined both sides. Water carafes sweated onto square linen coasters. Authority always has a temperature, and in rooms like that it is cool enough to make liars reach for jackets. Jordan stood when I came in. Mid-50s. Navy suit. Silver at the temples. Voice like velvet stretched over steel. "You look like Evelyn," he said. "That's probably useful." It often was. His associate, Naomi Briggs, was already setting out binders. She had the focused stillness of someone who enjoyed documentation more than conversation, which made me like her immediately. Each binder was tabbed in black. Title, trust, occupancy, financial transfers, loan inquiry, recorded statements. A timeline board stood near the wall. I walked over to it. March 14th, trust amendment executed. April 2nd, Deed recorded to Camille E. Mercer. May 11th through August 28th. Care reserve transfers initiated. September 3rd. Preliminary lender inquiry. October 7th. Realtor engagement texts. October 12th. Recorded breakfast room conversation. October 13th. Invalid notice to vacate presented. Seeing your family reduced to dates, and evidence is clarifying in a way therapy never quite manages. It strips away atmosphere. Leaves only action. At 10 sharp, the receptionist opened the door and ushered them in. My mother entered first, but not the way she'd entered the dining room. No theatrical certainty now. Just a stiff spine in a camel coat and a silk scarf tied too tightly at the throat. My father followed beside a broad man with a red tie and a briefcase, their attorney, presumably chosen for aggression over subtlety. Connor came behind them, hands in pockets, looking like he wished he'd been left in the car. And then Vivian stepped in last. My mother froze when she saw her. "You're here," she said. Vivian removed her gloves finger by finger and set them neatly on the table. "I was invited." My father's face hardened. There it was, the first fracture line. Jordan gestured everyone into seats. "Thank you for coming. This is a settlement conference regarding property rights, unauthorized attempts to market real estate, and related financial matters connected to the estate of Evelyn Mercer." Their attorney, Randall Pruitt, sat down with the confidence of a man who had billed people by the hour for 20 years and learned very little in return. "My clients dispute the framing." "Of course they do," Jordan said pleasantly. "That will not affect the documents." Naomi began distributing binders. My mother did not touch hers. My father opened his immediately with the impatience of a man who believed the first page of anything should reassure him. It did not. I watched the moment he found the deed. It traveled through him physically. His shoulders locked. His lips parted. His thumb stopped turning pages. Randall leaned over. "Read." Became still. Jordan stood by the timeline board and spoke the way surgeons move, without wasted motion. "Let's begin with ownership. The residence at 18, Rowan Crescent was transferred by recorded deed from the Evelyn Mercer Revocable Trust to Camille Elaine Mercer on April 2nd of last year, pursuant to the trust amendment executed on March 14th. This transfer was prepared by our office, witnessed appropriately, and recorded with the county. There is no ambiguity on title." My mother laughed under her breath. Not from humor, from collapse, trying on disbelief as a last outfit. Jordan continued, "Occupancy by family members after the transfer occurred with Ms. Mercer's temporary permission. There is no lease. There is no tenancy granting Mr. and Mrs. Hale authority over the property, which means the notice to vacate issued to Ms. Mercer is void on its face." He lifted a copy of the notice with 2 fingers as if it were slightly dirty. Randall cleared his throat. "My clients were under the good faith impression that the estate remained unsettled and that beneficial family ownership had not been finally determined." Naomi slid a document across the table. "On page 11, you'll find Mrs. Hale's signed acknowledgement of receipt of trust summary correspondence from April 9th. The highlighted section explicitly states the residence transfer has been completed." My mother did not look at it. Connor did. He looked at her, then back at the paper, then sat back very slowly. His face had that strange, drained quality people get when betrayal moves from suspicion to typography. Jordan moved to the next tab. Second issue. On September 3rd, Blackstone Community Bank received inquiry materials regarding a potential equity product secured by 18 Rowan Crescent. Preliminary documentation included an electronic owner acknowledgement purporting to be from Ms. Mercer. Device authentication and timing do not match her records. We have preserved copies. Randall held up a hand. No loan closed. No loan needed to close for the attempted misrepresentation to exist, Jordan said. My father shifted in his seat. I was exploring options. For collateral you do not own, Jordan replied. It's a family house. It is Camille's house. The words landed harder because Jordan did not raise his voice. My mother finally spoke. This is monstrous. I turned to her. Which part? Her head snapped toward me. You sitting there like a stranger while lawyers dissect your own parents. You called a realtor to throw me out. Her nostrils flared. Because you manipulated a dying woman. The room went still. Jordan did not even blink. Naomi simply opened another tab. I'm going to advise you, Jordan said, tone unchanged, to be extremely careful with allegations about capacity. We have physician notes, witness declarations, and video from the trust execution meeting. Evelyn Mercer was lucid, specific, and unequivocal. She discussed her daughter's spending, her son-in-law's debt exposure, and her granddaughter's caregiving role in detail. Naomi slid still another paper across, a contemporaneous memo from Jordan's file. My father stared at it without reading. This is all one-sided. No, I said quietly. It just isn't yours. Jordan stepped to the timeline board and uncapped a pen. Now for the financial piece. Between May and August, $48,000 designated within estate records as care reserve funds were transferred out through accounts controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Hale. The transfer notes were coded as post-care reconciliation and vendor holdback. We have not yet identified lawful invoices supporting those amounts. Randall looked at my parents sharply. You told me the reimbursements were documented. My mother's eyes flicked to my father. There. Another fracture. He answered too fast. Most of it was documented. Most, Randall repeated. Naomi placed copies of bank records in front of him. The paper whispered across the table. Such a quiet sound for something that could ruin a life. We also have a secondary issue, Jordan said. The anticipated listing of the property despite adverse title knowledge. At that, Denise Kessler entered the room. My mother half rose from her chair. What is she doing here? Denise wore a charcoal-sheath dress, low heels, and the expression of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours deciding exactly how much nonsense she was willing to tolerate in exchange for staying licensed. She took the remaining chair, set a slim folder on the table, and folded her hands. Jordan answered, Miss Kessler is here because she was approached to market the property. My mother's voice sharpened. That conversation was confidential. Denise looked at her evenly. Not after you asked me to ignore title. No one spoke. It was almost beautiful. Jordan nodded to Denise. Please explain. Denise opened her folder. On October 7th, Teresa Hale contacted me regarding a quiet off-market sale and eventual formal listing of 18 Rowan Crescent. When I requested preliminary title confirmation, I encountered a deed showing Ms. Mercer as owner. I raised the discrepancy. Mrs. Hale told me, quote, the daughter is temporary. Handle it as a family matter and list under us once she's out. My mother's skin flushed a dark, furious pink. That is not what I said. Denise slid printed texts across the table. It was exactly what she had said. Connor put one hand over his mouth. My father stared straight ahead. Randall closed his eyes for a second, very briefly, as if calculating whether today's invoice would be worth the reputational tax. Jordan said, Miss Kessler immediately refused and preserved communications. My mother laughed again, but now it sounded shredded. So everyone was working against us. Not everyone, Vivian said for the first time. My mother turned. Don't. Vivian leaned back in her chair, composed as black glass. You shouldn't have asked me to help humiliate your daughter if you didn't want me watching. My father's head snapped toward her. You fed her information. I preserve evidence, Vivian corrected. Traitor, my mother whispered. Vivian's mouth moved in something like pity. Teresa, you called your own child a parasite in her own dining room. Our dining room. My mother shot back automatically. No, I said. Mine. The silence that followed was dense enough to feel. Jordan let it sit. He was good at that. Good lawyers know silence is not empty space. It is a weapon with excellent posture. Then he resumed. There is one more element. We have recordings from the property's interior security system capturing Mr. Hale discussing a plan to change locks before the expiration of an invalid notice to vacate, with awareness of title uncertainty. We also have witness communications establishing a deliberate strategy to stage a family confrontation in order to manufacture compliance. Naomi clicked a remote, and a still image appeared on the screen at the end of the room. The breakfast room camera angle. My father pacing. My mother seated. Morning light on the tile floor. The timestamp crisp in the lower corner. My father shoved his binder closed. This is absurd. No, Jordan said. This is documented. Connor looked from the screen to my father. You said it was just a conversation. It was about changing the locks. My father rounded on him. Stay out of this. There it is, I said quietly. All heads turned toward me. I sat with my hands folded over the binder and let my gaze move from one face to the next. My mother's outrage, my father's fury, Connor's dawning horror, Randall's professional irritation, Denise's controlled disgust, Vivian's sad recognition. So many years of family mythology arranged neatly under recessed lighting. I wanted you to see them, I said to Connor. Not me. Them. My mother shut her eyes for a second, as if the sentence hurt more than the evidence. Jordan continued like a metronome. Our proposal is straightforward. Mr. and Mrs. Hale will vacate the property within 14 days. They will sign acknowledgments of ownership and non-interest. They will reimburse misappropriated care reserve funds pursuant to an agreed schedule secured by confession of judgment. They will issue written instructions retracting any claim, direct or implied, to authority over 18 Rowan Crescent. In exchange, Ms. Mercer will defer immediate civil filing and hold criminal referral in abeyance pending compliance. Randall sat up straighter. Criminal referral? Naomi answered. Potential matters include attempted fraud in lending documents, elder financial abuse exposure, and false representations relating to real property. We are prepared to proceed if necessary. My mother gripped the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles blanched. You would send your parents to the police. I looked at her. You were ready to put my belongings on the sidewalk. That is not the same. You're right, I said. This is paperwork. Randall turned to my parents, all trace of swagger gone. Did either of you sign her name? No answer. Did either of you authorize anyone else to? Still no answer. That silence told him enough. He sat back, exhaled once, and pinched the bridge of his nose. The red tie suddenly looked theatrical in the worst way. Connor got to his feet, his chair pushed back hard against the carpet. I'm done, he said. My mother looked up at him, stunned. Sit down. No. You are not leaving this room. He laughed once, jagged and disbelieving. Why? So you can tell me more things that aren't true. He looked at me then, not pleading exactly but stripped. I didn't know about the money. I know. He nodded. Once. Small. Then he turned to Randall. I want separate counsel. My father slammed his hand onto the table. You ungrateful little coward. Connor flinched as if struck. And there, in that instant, the whole family geometry exposed itself. The golden child had always only been gold, so long as he reflected the right light. Randall looked between them with open annoyance. If interests are diverging, I may need to reconsider joint representation. They are diverging, Connor said. My mother's voice climbed. Connor! But he was already backing away from the table, pale and furious. You used me, he said. You made me stand there while you called her names in front of strangers. In front of family, my mother corrected, because even then optics were all she had left. Connor gave a short, broken laugh. That's exactly the problem. He left. The door shut softly behind him, which somehow made it harsher. My father turned on Denise next. And you. You think this protects you? It protects my license, she said. And my freedom. You were supposed to handle a listing. I was supposed to handle a lawful listing. Jordan let the chaos crest. Let blame ricochet around the polished wood. My mother accusing Denise of betrayal. My father muttering about disloyal opportunists. Vivian watching with terrible serenity. Randall advising everyone repeatedly to stop speaking. It was like watching a cracked chandelier finally start dropping crystals one by one. Then Jordan lifted one hand. Enough! He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. Your choices are simple, he said. Cooperate with the proposed agreement and contain the damage. Or refuse and we file. If we file, these documents become exhibits. Discovery expands. Third parties are subpoenaed. Lending contacts are examined. Banking records are examined. Communications are examined. And whatever privacy remains to this family will evaporate. My mother's breath hitched. Privacy. Status. Reputation. Those were words she understood. My father stared at me with a hatred so concentrated it had almost gone cold. This is what you wanted. No, I said. I wanted you to stop. His laugh was low and ugly. Don't pretend virtue now. I held his gaze. Next time you try to sell a house, make sure the owner isn't living in it. Even Vivian looked down at the table for a second after that. Randall asked for 10 minutes alone with his clients. Jordan granted 15. We stepped out into the hallway lined with framed etchings of old city maps, their black lines delicate against cream matting. Denise asked Naomi where the ladies' room was. Vivian leaned against the wall and crossed her ankles, suddenly looking every one of her years. "You held that longer than I could have," she said. "I learned from experts." She snorted softly. "No, you learned from surviving them." Jordan stood beside me with his hands in his pockets. "They'll sign." My pulse was steady again. "Dad won't want to. He doesn't matter as much as he thinks he does," Jordan said. "Teresa understands social annihilation. We structured for her." That was colder than anything I would have said, which was one reason he was worth every invoice. When we went back in, my mother's mascara had smudged faintly at one corner. My father looked like a man swallowing nails. Randall had reorganized the papers into a neat stack, the universal body language for there is no good outcome, only a less public one. "We'll need a few modifications to timing," he said. "But conceptually, we are prepared to resolve." Jordan nodded once. "Good." The next hour was dry, technical, and immensely satisfying. Dates, payment schedule, removal of personal property, access windows for movers, non-disparagement language, limited by truthful legal disclosure, surrender of keys, gate remotes, alarm codes, written confirmation that no further encumbrance attempts would be made against the property. Naomi wrote notes in tiny, immaculate script. Randall marked edits. Denise signed a short statement about the aborted listing contact. Vivian signed a declaration preserving the text threads she'd provided. And then the papers were ready. Jordan slid them across. My mother looked at the signature line as if it were an insult carved into stone. "This is obscene," she said. "No," Jordan replied. "It's merciful." My father shoved his chair back. "I'm not signing anything that says I have no claim in my own." Randall cut across him. "Martin, sign." The room changed then. Not dramatically. Just enough. That final humiliating shift when the loudest person discovers even his own lawyer is tired of pretending. My father glared at Randall. At Jordan. At me. Then he grabbed the pen and signed with such pressure I heard the nib grind. My mother signed next, elegant even in defeat, each letter of Teresa Hale still perfectly formed. Beautiful penmanship, no character at all. When the last page was complete, Jordan collected the papers, aligned them neatly, and said, "Thank you." It sounded less like gratitude than a gate closing. My mother stood first. She picked up her coat with one sharp motion and turned to me, eyes glittering with wounded rage. "You think this makes you powerful?" I rose slowly. "No." "Then what does it make you?" I looked at her scarf, tied too tightly, at the tremor in her fingers where they gripped the leather strap of her bag, at the face I had spent my whole life trying to read correctly. "It makes me home," I said. She stared at me, really stared, and for the first time I think she understood that whatever version of me had once begged silently to be chosen over appearances was gone. My father muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Vivian stepped aside to let them pass. Denise left without looking at either of them. Randall gave me a curt professional nod that said, if not respect, then at least recognition of force. At the door, I said one last thing. "Mom." She stopped. I let the pause settle until she had no choice but to turn. "Since you care so much about family image," I said quietly, "try leaving through the side entrance. The lobby is crowded on Fridays." Her face changed in a way I had no words for at the time. Rage, yes. Shame, yes. But underneath both was the raw, involuntary knowledge that she had been measured by her own standards and found small. They left by the side entrance. The next 2 weeks were a study in degraded grandeur. Movers came on scheduled days under Naomi's supervision and my explicit instructions that nothing from the library, dining room sideboard, or upstairs cedar chest was to leave the property unless on the Hale inventory sheet. My mother tried twice to claim artwork that had belonged to Grandma. The second time, Naomi produced photographs from the estate catalog and simply said, "No." My father spent most of the move pacing the driveway in dark sunglasses, making calls no one seemed eager to return. Connor arrived separately with a rented van and took his things in 2 trips, barely speaking except once, when he paused at the foyer and said, "I really didn't know." "I know," I said again. He nodded, and left with a box labeled kitchen in my mother's handwriting that probably contained nothing from any kitchen I'd ever seen. On the 14th day at 5:43 p.m., my father placed the brass house keys, the gate remote, and the alarm fob on the entry table beneath the stained glass window and said, without looking at me, "You'll regret this." The sunset behind the glass scattered red and blue across the marble floor. He stood in it for a second without realizing, colored by the house he no longer controlled. "Maybe," I said. He waited. I didn't give him more. He left. When the front door closed, the house made a sound I had never heard before. Not a creak, not a shift, something subtler. The release of pressure, as if the rooms themselves had been holding their breath. That first night alone, I walked through every floor barefoot. The foyer with its cold, checkerboard marble. The dining room with the walnut table and pale walls still faintly marked where my mother's over-decorated mirrors had hung. The library with the leather chair, green lamp, and the smell of cedar and dust and old paper. The second-floor hall, where late sunlight turned the runner rug amber. The third-floor office where my father had set up his temporary empire and left behind exactly one bent paperclip and a broken sense of entitlement. In the kitchen, I opened all the windows for 10 minutes despite the chill. Fresh air came through the copper screen, sharp as cut fruit. Then I closed them, locked them, and made tea in Grandma's blue enamel pot. I carried the cup to the back terrace and sat under a wool blanket while the sky went from peach to slate over the garden wall. No speeches, no music, no grand cinematic collapse. Just the kind of peace that arrives so quietly you almost miss it if you've spent too long bracing for impact. 6 months later, the mornings felt different. Not because the house had changed. Houses change slowly if they are loved properly. But because I had. I woke now in the front bedroom where the curtains were linen and the light came in pale gold over the white-painted radiator and the old oak floorboards. The first full spring after they left, I had the windows restored, the gutters replaced, and the front steps repointed. I repainted the breakfast room a muted green. My mother would have called gloomy, and my grandmother would have called sensible. I turned the third-floor office into a consulting studio with built-in shelves, 2 monitors, a drafting table, and a long pinboard where I kept case notes for my growing client list. Every morning I took coffee onto the balcony outside the primary bedroom and stood with both hands around the warm ceramic mug while the neighborhood woke up below me. Delivery trucks on the avenue. A dog walker with 3 impossible terriers. Sunlight catching on polished car roofs. The magnolia in the front garden opening one waxy bloom at a time. Fresh starts do not usually announce themselves with orchestras. They arrive as repetition without dread. My parents, meanwhile, discover that consequences are much harder to redecorate than living rooms. My father lost his position at Crestline Builders 3 weeks after the settlement. Officially, he resigned to pursue private opportunities. Unofficially, a compliance review into expense classifications and personal use reimbursements began after a lender contact, now suddenly very cooperative, mentioned his name in connection with the attempted loan on my property. Nothing sensational, nothing handcuffed, just the kind of discreet corporate disapproval that strips a man of authority one calendar invite at a time. For someone who had spent 20 years weaponizing boardroom confidence, the punishment was beautifully proportionate. He was not publicly destroyed. He was professionally reduced. My mother's consequences were quieter, and for her, far worse. She had built herself around social architecture, charity luncheons, church restoration committees, floral guild meetings, the choreography of being seen as indispensable. Once it became impossible to explain why she and my father had abruptly left Rowan Crescent, stories began moving through her circles in that soft, lethal way affluent neighborhoods trade scandal. Not facts, exactly. Just enough shape around the truth to let people enjoy it. The daughter inherited. There was a legal matter. Something about money. Something about an attempted sale. I heard from Vivian that invitations grew less frequent. Committee leadership rotated. A woman who had once corrected linen folds at other people's events now found herself attending fewer events at all. She was not exiled. She was simply no longer central. For my mother, that was exile. Connor took the shortest fall and, in some ways, the most honest one. The brokerage internship my father had lined up for him vanished when my father's own credibility thinned out. Connor ended up renting a 1-bedroom over a dentist's office near Midtown, and taking a salaried operations job for a logistics company. He texted me once, months later, a photograph of an aggressively beige desk with the caption, "Karma Office." I didn't answer, but I did save the image. It was the first thing he'd ever sent me that wasn't a demand, a joke at my expense, or an accidental confession. Then there were the enablers. Pastor Allen, who had once told me over lemon bars that honoring your parents sometimes means yielding what feels fair, found himself dealing with his own little storm when someone forwarded an email showing he had agreed to encourage reconciliation at my mother's request before ever asking what had happened. Nothing career-ending. Just enough embarrassment to teach him that vague moral authority is less convincing when it comes with attachments. A family friend named Celeste, who had happily repeated my mother's line about my refusal to launch, later discovered her own son had quietly emptied a joint account she'd never bothered to monitor. Life has a dark sense of humor. My phone became a museum of attempted access. At first there were demands. Your lawyer is out of control. You have embarrassed this family enough. Call me immediately. Then came the revisions. We should speak privately. This has gone too far. Surely there's a way to move forward without bitterness. Then, when those failed, came the strangest category of all. Nostalgia weaponized as entitlement. I miss Sunday dinners. This family is not the same. Your grandmother would hate this division. One message from my mother, sent at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday, simply read, "I still know how you take your tea." I archived them all. Not deleted. Archived. That mattered to me. Deleting would have been denial. Archiving was classification. Evidence of a past ecosystem no longer active. My father called 3 times from unknown numbers. I let them go to voicemail. His messages were remarkable in their inability to choose a lane. One would begin with contempt, slide into threat, and end in something almost resembling injury. Another would accuse me of turning legal procedure into a moral performance. A third, received after midnight, contained 12 seconds of silence before he said, very softly, "You always were your grandmother's favorite," and hung up. That one I listened to twice. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed something he would never have admitted in daylight. He knew exactly why he had lost. Around that time I left Halcyon Risk Advisory and started my own firm. The idea grew directly out of the mess my parents had created. Over months of document review, meetings, title flags, and estate tracing, I realized how many families with property, elder care complexity, or inherited assets were walking around one forged signature away from catastrophe. People with enough money to own things, and not enough structure to protect them. Adult children caring for parents while siblings circled. Older homeowners bullied into streamlining title. Informal arrangements treated as permanent until one relative got greedy. So I built Mercer Property Council out of the 3rd floor of the house they had tried to take. I started small. Estate occupancy audits, ownership verification packages, quiet consulting for attorneys who needed someone fluent in the emotional mechanics of family property disputes. By autumn I had a part-time assistant, a forensic bookkeeper on contract, and more referrals than I could comfortably manage without becoming the exact kind of overworked martyr my mother had always expected me to be. There was a deep, private pleasure in sending polished invoices from a desk overlooking the back garden while the boiler I had paid to repair hummed steadily below. I wasn't alone in any of it. Vivian became a fixture in the new version of my life. Not in an intrusive way. She didn't try to mother me, which was lucky because I would not have allowed it. She simply appeared with practical offerings and accurate gossip. A lamp from an antique market that would look less earnest than the one you have now. A contractor recommendation. A bottle of wine and a sentence like, "You won't believe who I saw buying boxed roses at."